She was too old for every man. Until a young rancher chose her without apology, Martha Reynolds had always been a woman who preferred quiet over chaos, a life measured in small comforts and steady routines. She had lived in the same small town in Montana for nearly all her life, in a modest wooden house that had belonged to her family for generations. The paint on the exterior had faded, and the garden in the front yard was a little wild around the edges, but to Martha, it was perfect. She liked knowing that every morning when she stepped outside to water the flowers or check on her vegetables, she could find a small sense of peace before the world fully woke up. At 52, Martha had learned to move through life with caution. She had been married once, decades ago, to a man who had promised forever, but had left far sooner than she ever expected. She had been widowed for many years, and in that time she had learned to find joy in solitude and in the rhythm of her own life. She had a routine that suited her. Mornings spent tending the garden, afternoons at the library where she volunteered, evenings curled up with a book or knitting quietly by the fire. Her golden retriever Daisy was her constant companion, always greeting her with wagging tail and eager eyes. Despite the quiet contentment she had built around herself, there was a part of Martha that carried a subtle loneliness. She had friends in town, people she had grown up with, and yet many of them were married or had families. When she attended town events or casual gatherings, she often felt the gentle weight of unspoken judgment. People would smile politely, but sometimes their eyes betrayed a thought they did not voice. She's too old for a new life. She should just accept being alone. For years, she had learned to ignore it, to carry on as if their opinions did not matter. And mostly, they didn't. But at times, the words echoed in her mind, and she felt a quiet ache, a yearning for something she couldn't quite name. Martha's days were simple, but they were not without purpose. She enjoyed the rhythm of small tasks. She liked to start her mornings with a cup of strong black coffee, brewed in a pot that had been in her family for years, and toast that she spread with her favorite homemade jam. She would sit by the kitchen window, looking out over the garden and the rolling hills beyond, thinking about nothing in particular, just savoring the quiet. Then she would step outside, shoes crunching on the gravel path, hands moving over the soil as she tended her plants. Gardening, she often thought, was much like life itself. It required patience, care, and a willingness to nurture things even if there was no immediate reward. After breakfast and the morning chores, Martha would walk down to the small library where she volunteered. It was a modest building, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's name, and the smell of old books mingled with the faint scent of polished wood. She loved working there, helping children find books, assisting the elderly in locating old records, and occasionally recommending novels she thought might spark someone's imagination. For Martha, the library was more than a building full of books. It was a place where stories lived, where people could escape, dream, and imagine. She often thought about how much she loved stories, how they allowed her to travel to places she might never see and live lives she might never lead. Evenings were quieter still. She would return home, feed Daisy, and light the fireplace. Sometimes she would write letters to old friends who lived in distant towns, letters that were never long but always honest, filled with thoughts and memories she wanted to share. Other times, she would simply sit in silence, watching the sun sink behind the hills, feeling a sense of calm that had become increasingly rare in the world beyond her little town. She liked her life this way, predictable and safe, with few surprises. It was a life she had chosen, and yet there were moments when she could not help but wonder what it would be like to feel a spark of excitement, a connection that went beyond friendship or routine. Martha's neighbors were kind enough, though most of them had their own busy lives. They waved when she walked past, sometimes stopped for a chat, and occasionally invited her to local events. but there was always a subtle difference in their tone, a gentle hesitation, as if they were unsure whether she should be part of the same social world they inhabited. They meant no harm. It was simply the way people viewed a woman her age who lived alone. Over time, Martha had learned to accept it without bitterness. She told herself that she did not need their approval, that her happiness was her own to determine. And in many ways, she had found happiness in the small joys of her daily routine, the warmth of the sun on her face, the sound of Daisy's paws on the floor, the smell of bread baking in the oven, the quiet companionship of her own thoughts. Even so, there were nights when Martha felt the weight of silence more acutely. She would sit in her living room, wrapped in a soft blanket, staring into the fire, and think about the life she had led. She remembered the excitement of youth, the hope and intensity of first love, the heartbreak of loss, and the long years of learning to stand on her own. She knew she had grown stronger, more self-reliant, and more capable of finding peace within herself. But she also knew that the heart does not stop desiring connection, and that sometimes, even the strongest among us feel the ache of loneliness. Martha had long learned to silence that ache with work, with hobbies, with books and walks in the hills. She had friends who cared for her, neighbors who respected her, and a life filled with small pleasures that gave her a sense of purpose. And yet, she allowed herself, in quiet moments, to wonder what it would be like to meet someone who saw her, not as a woman past her prime, not as someone to be pitied or ignored, but as a full, vibrant person, capable of love, joy, and laughter. It was a hope she did not often admit, even to herself, because she had learned the hard way that life did not always give second chances, and the world had a way of judging those who dared to want more than what society expected of them. Still, Martha held on to that small spark of possibility. It was a quiet, almost hidden part of her life, tucked away behind the comfort of routine and responsibility. She did not expect it to bloom suddenly, nor did she imagine that anyone would come along to change her life completely. And yet, the very fact that she allowed herself to imagine it, even in small ways, meant that she had not completely given up on the idea of happiness, on the idea that life could still surprise her, even at 52. Martha's life was not glamorous or extraordinary, but it was rich in its own way. She had learned the value of independence, the joy of small victories, and the comfort of knowing who she was and what she wanted. She had learned that life could be both gentle and harsh, that beauty often lay in ordinary things, and that true contentment came from within. And yet, beneath the surface of her quiet, steady existence, there was a longing, a wish for connection, for understanding, for someone who could see her fully and accept her without hesitation. As the sun set on another quiet Montana evening, Martha sat by the window with Daisy at her feet, looking out over the hills that stretched endlessly into the distance. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, the wind rustling softly through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the earth after a long day. She felt the familiar comfort of her surroundings, the safety of her routine, and yet, somewhere deep inside, there was a flicker of curiosity, a hint of hope that perhaps life still had surprises in store. She did not know what the future would bring, nor did she expect it to bring anything extraordinary, but she allowed herself, just for a moment, to imagine that perhaps, someday, something, or someone, might come along to remind her that life was never too late for a new chapter. And in that quiet, golden moment, Martha Reynolds, with her heart full of memories and her spirit quietly strong, felt a gentle thrill at the thought that her story was not yet finished. Martha Reynolds had grown used to the rhythm of her life, each day a gentle echo of the one before. She liked it that way. She had learned that predictability brought comfort and a quiet satisfaction that few outside her small town could understand. But one summer morning, the calm of her life was about to be gently disturbed in a way she had never expected. It started with a sound she didn't hear often, a car engine struggling down the gravel road in front of her house. Martha looked out the kitchen window just in time to see a young man pull over, stepping out of a dusty pickup truck that seemed to have seen better days. He was tall, with broad shoulders that spoke of work under the sun, and his dark hair fell into his eyes as he inspected his truck with a frown. Martha watched silently, curious but cautious. She had learned long ago not to make assumptions about strangers, especially ones who appeared out of nowhere. Then came the sound that really caught her attention, a shout. The young man slammed the hood of his truck and muttered something under his breath, frustration in every syllable. Without thinking, Martha grabbed her cardigan and stepped outside, her slippers crunching softly on the gravel. "Is everything all right?" she called. The young man looked up, surprised, his expression softening when he saw her. "Yeah, I think so," he said, though his hands were smudged with grease. "Just the truck giving me trouble." Martha nodded, instinctively understanding that he needed help. Though she was no mechanic, she had grown up on a small family farm and knew her way around basic repairs. "Do you want a hand?" she asked. He hesitated, then gave a small smile. "That would be, really helpful, actually. I'm not very good with this kind of thing." Her curiosity piqued. Martha moved closer, squinting under the morning sun, as she noticed the fine dust on his jeans, the calluses on his hands, and the quiet determination in his posture. There was something unassuming but strong about him, a kind of presence that made her feel immediately at ease, even though she barely knew him. "My name's Martha," she said, holding out a hand. "Caleb," he replied, shaking it with a firm, steady grip. "Caleb Turner." They started talking as she helped him check the engine, her hands surprisingly steady as she pointed out a loose belt and a few other minor issues. Caleb listened intently, genuinely interested in her instructions, and Martha found herself smiling more than she had in months. There was something refreshing about his sincerity, the way he treated her as someone who mattered rather than as a curious older woman to be pitied or ignored. As they worked together, the conversation drifted naturally from trucks and engines to life in the town. Caleb had recently returned to help manage his family's cattle ranch after spending a few years in the city learning more about ranching techniques. Martha listened, intrigued by his stories of hard work, long days under the sun, and his quiet love for the land. He spoke with respect, not just for the work he did, but for the people who had shaped him, and Martha found herself drawn to his humility and kindness. "You're very knowledgeable," Caleb said at one point, wiping his hands on a rag. "Most people my age would have just kept struggling and given up." Martha laughed softly, a sound that felt natural and unforced. "I've had years to practice," she replied. "And besides, giving up is never as satisfying as figuring things out for yourself." There was a pause, a small moment where the world seemed to shrink around them. Martha realized she hadn't felt this alive, this noticed, in a long time. It wasn't just the help he needed or the conversation. It was the way he looked at her, genuinely interested and unbothered by her age or her quiet, ordinary life. She found herself curious about him in a way she hadn't been curious about anyone in years. After the engine was finally fixed, Caleb leaned back against his truck, smiling in relief. "You know, I don't usually meet people like you," he said, his tone warm and honest. "Most folks in town wouldn't even stop to help someone like me. And most women, well, I don't think they would notice a thing about me." Martha shook her head gently. "I notice a lot more than you think," she said, surprising herself with her boldness. She hadn't meant to sound flirtatious. She wasn't sure she even knew how. but there was a spark in his eyes that made her heart skip. He chuckled, and she noticed how easy it felt to be around him, how the usual awkwardness of meeting someone new didn't exist here. He talked about his life with passion, about the ranch and the cattle, the long summer days and the work that never seemed to end. She listened, fascinated, and found herself sharing little pieces of her own life: the garden she loved, the library where she volunteered, the small joys she found in her quiet routines. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Caleb finally said, "You know, I wasn't expecting to meet anyone like you today. Most people my age, well, not like you, but it's nice." Martha's cheeks warmed. "Not like me?" she asked, teasing lightly, though her heart fluttered. "No," he said simply, "not like you." It was a small comment, but it carried weight. It was the kind of statement that made Martha think about her own life differently. For years, she had accepted that romance, excitement, or even deep connection might be things she would never experience again. She had convinced herself that her age and her quiet, predictable life were a natural barrier to anything new. But here was Caleb, a young man who didn't see those barriers at all. Here was someone who simply saw her. Over the next few weeks, Caleb found reasons to return to her neighborhood. Sometimes it was a technical question about the library's old furnace system. Other times it was help with a minor repair or a friendly chat when he brought supplies from the ranch. Martha looked forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. Each encounter was simple, natural, and without pretense, yet each left her feeling lighter, more alive, and quietly hopeful. The town noticed, of course. Small towns always notice when something unusual happens. Some raised eyebrows when they saw Martha talking to the young rancher, whispering among themselves about the age difference. But Martha found that she didn't care. Caleb didn't care. Their friendship, or whatever it was slowly becoming, felt genuine and unforced, and that mattered far more than anyone else's opinion. One afternoon, Caleb invited Martha to accompany him to the ranch to see a calf that had just been born. She hesitated at first, unsure if it was appropriate, but his smile was infectious. "Come on," he said. "It'll be fun. You'll love it. And I could use some company." She agreed, and that visit marked a turning point. Martha found herself immersed in the ranch life, feeling the soil under her hands, watching the sunrise over wide-open fields, hearing the gentle lowing of cows and the rhythmic clatter of horseshoes. She felt invigorated in a way she hadn't in decades. And Caleb, patient, respectful, and attentive, was there beside her, guiding her, answering her questions, and sharing stories about his family, his work, and his dreams. During that visit, Martha realized something important. Age, experience, and expectations did not have to define a person's capacity for happiness or connection. Caleb didn't see her as too old, and that simple acceptance made her feel free in a way she hadn't felt since her youth. She laughed more that day than she had in months, felt the thrill of being part of something larger than herself, and found a subtle warmth in her chest whenever he looked at her with honest appreciation. By the time she returned home, the sun was low on the horizon, painting the fields in gold and crimson. Daisy barked happily at her side, and Martha felt a quiet excitement that lingered well into the evening. She knew this was only the beginning of something new and unexpected, something that would challenge her understanding of herself and the life she thought she had fully shaped. Martha Reynolds, who had once been content to live quietly and accept the world's judgment, now felt the first stirrings of possibility. It was a gentle awakening, slow and unassuming, but undeniable. She had met someone who saw her not as a woman too old for love or adventure, but as a human being with depth, experience, and a heart ready to embrace life again. And for the first time in many years, She allowed herself to hope that maybe, just maybe, life still had surprises in store. After the summer days spent with Caleb, Martha Reynolds found herself in unfamiliar territory. Her life had always been quiet, predictable, and safe, and she had grown comfortable with that. But now, after each meeting with him, a strange feeling lingered, a mix of excitement and uncertainty that she hadn't experienced in years. It was thrilling, yes, but also unsettling, like stepping onto a path she had long thought closed to her. Martha noticed how her thoughts kept drifting to him, even when she tried to focus on her daily routines. While watering her garden in the early morning, she found herself imagining his smile and the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. At the library, she would think of his stories about the ranch, and at night, as she knitted quietly by the fire, she felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in decades. She tried to push these feelings aside, reminding herself that she was 52, that a man half her age could never truly be interested in her, and that she had no reason to allow herself such hope. But hope, Martha realized, was persistent, and Caleb was unlike anyone she had ever met. He was kind, respectful, and genuine. He didn't make her feel old or invisible, and he didn't treat her as someone to be pitied. Instead, he listened to her, laughed with her, and valued her opinions. Every gesture, from small acts of kindness like bringing fresh vegetables from the ranch to patiently explaining how a fence post needed repair, reinforced a simple truth: he genuinely cared. Despite this, Martha felt a quiet resistance rising inside her. She had spent years protecting herself from disappointment, learning to build a life that didn't rely on anyone else. The thought of allowing someone new into her heart, especially someone younger, terrified her. She worried about what people in town would think. Whispers had already begun. Subtle glances at the library. Conversations paused when she entered a room. The small-town world was never cruel, but it had a way of judging quietly, and Martha had lived long enough to understand that judgment could sting. Her friends, though well-meaning, didn't help matters. One afternoon, Martha met her old friend Linda at the local cafe. Linda had been a friend since childhood, someone who knew Martha's life story almost as well as she did. But when Caleb's name came up in conversation, Martha felt a familiar tension. "You're spending a lot of time with that young rancher, aren't you?" Linda asked gently, stirring her tea. "People might start talking. I mean, he's so much younger, and you've lived alone for so long." Martha sighed, her fingers tightening around the cup. She had expected this, yet hearing it out loud made her feel defensive. "Linda," she said softly, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm not worried about what people think. Caleb is kind and thoughtful, and he treats me with respect. Isn't that what matters?" Linda hesitated, then nodded slowly, though a shadow of doubt lingered in her eyes.
Of course,
"I don't want you to get hurt." Martha appreciated her friend's worry, but she also realized that fear of judgment had been shaping her life for far too long. For decades, she had avoided new experiences, convincing herself that some opportunities were no longer meant for her simply because of her age. But now, faced with someone who seemed to genuinely care for her, she felt a tug in her heart, a desire to embrace the possibility of happiness, even if it went against what she had always believed. The inner conflict grew stronger as Caleb continued to be a consistent presence in her life. He showed up at the library with questions about an old tractor book, he helped repair her garden fence, and he invited her to small, wholesome outings, like feeding the calves or watching the sunset over the hills. Each visit was filled with laughter and conversation, yet each also reminded Martha of the societal and personal boundaries she had long accepted. She wondered if she was being foolish, if her hope was simply a dream that would end in disappointment. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace, Daisy curled at her feet. Martha reflected on her feelings. She realized that her resistance wasn't just about age or town gossip. It was also about vulnerability. She had spent years building walls around her heart, and now those walls were cracking. The idea of trusting someone, of letting herself be seen fully again, was both exciting and terrifying. She worried that if she allowed herself to feel too deeply, she might expose herself to pain she wasn't ready to face. Yet, despite her fears, Martha couldn't deny the happiness Caleb brought into her life. His visits had become the highlight of her days, and his simple, genuine interest in her made her feel valued and alive. She realized that what she was feeling wasn't just companionship. It was something deeper, a connection that reminded her of the person she had once been, before life had taught her to be cautious. It was during one of these quiet evenings that Martha finally admitted something to herself. She was afraid, not of Caleb, not of the age difference, not even of the whispers, but of losing herself again to fear and hesitation. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope without immediately silencing it. She acknowledged that she wanted this connection, this companionship, and maybe even love. And acknowledging it was both liberating and frightening. Her doubts returned the next morning when she saw Caleb walking down the gravel road toward her house, toolbox in hand and a bright smile on his face. She felt her heart race, and for a moment she considered retreating to the safety of her kitchen. But then she remembered her own words from the night before. Happiness was not something to be hidden, and life's surprises were not always meant to be avoided. "Good morning, Martha," Caleb called, waving as he approached. "Good morning," she replied, a small smile tugging at her lips. They spent the morning repairing a broken gate together. Caleb worked patiently, explaining each step, while Martha followed his instructions and added her own experience from years of tending her property. The physical labor, the shared laughter, and the quiet companionship created a rhythm between them that felt natural and comforting. Yet every so often, Martha caught herself hesitating, a subtle tension in her chest reminding her of the doubts she had been carrying. As they finished, Caleb leaned against the gate and wiped his brow. "You know, Martha, I've really enjoyed spending time with you," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I like being around you." Martha felt a flutter in her chest. She wanted to tell him how much she valued his presence, how much his words and actions had changed her outlook, but she hesitated. Part of her still clung to caution, to the belief that this was too good to be true. I enjoy your company too, Caleb," she said finally, her voice soft. "You make ordinary days feel brighter, and I'm grateful for that." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'm glad. I hope we can keep spending time together, if that's all right with you." Martha nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She wanted to embrace this connection, to allow herself to experience joy without reservation, yet the echoes of doubt remained. She realized that life was asking her to take a step she hadn't taken in years, to trust, to open her heart, and to risk disappointment in order to experience happiness. The days that followed were a careful dance between desire and caution. Martha found herself looking forward to Caleb's visits with anticipation. Yet she also worried about what might happen if she allowed herself to feel too deeply. The townspeople's whispers continued, subtle but persistent, and her own insecurities surfaced in quiet moments of reflection. She wondered if she was being foolish, if she was clinging to a fleeting hope, or if perhaps she was finally allowing herself to embrace something real. Despite the doubts, Martha began to notice a shift within herself. She felt lighter, more engaged with life, and more willing to take small risks. She laughed more easily, felt more present in each moment, and discovered a renewed sense of curiosity about the world around her. Caleb's presence was a catalyst, gently urging her to step beyond the boundaries she had set for herself, and she found that she was ready to explore what life might hold if she let go of fear. By the end of the month, Martha understood that the choice before her was clear. She could continue to resist, to let doubt and fear dictate her life, or she could allow herself to embrace the unexpected joy that Caleb brought. It was not an easy decision, but for the first time in decades, she felt the courage to hope, to imagine a future where age and expectation did not define her capacity for happiness. Martha Reynolds, once cautious and reserved, realized that life had opened a new chapter for her. The path was uncertain, the outcome unknown, but for the first time in a long while, she was willing to step forward without knowing exactly where it would lead. She understood that joy, connection, and love were not reserved for the young alone, and that sometimes the heart had a wisdom that reason could not explain. And so, Martha took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the summer sun on her face and the steady heartbeat of possibility in her chest. She did not yet know what the future held, but she was ready to face it, with all her doubts, all her fears, and all her hope intact. The weeks that followed had been a whirlwind of emotions for Martha Reynolds. Life, which had always felt predictable and quiet, was beginning to stir in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Each encounter with Caleb brought warmth, laughter, and a subtle thrill that crept into her heart. And yet there was always that quiet voice of doubt, whispering that it was impossible, that she was too old, that small-town opinions mattered. One late afternoon, Caleb came by to help with some chores in her garden. The sun was low in the sky, painting the hills with a soft golden light, and Martha felt a strange mixture of anticipation and nervousness as she watched him unload tools from his truck. She was fully aware that her feelings for him had grown stronger with each passing day, but the question of what she should do with those feelings lingered like a shadow. As Caleb approached, he carried a small basket of fresh eggs from the ranch and a bag of sweet corn. "Thought you might enjoy some fresh farm produce," he said with a smile. "It's nothing fancy, but I figured it might brighten your day." Martha's chest warmed at the gesture. It was small, thoughtful, and entirely sincere. "Thank you, Caleb," she replied, smiling. "You always know how to make ordinary days feel special." He set the basket down on the table, brushing dirt off his hands. "I like seeing you happy," he said simply. "It's nice being around someone who really enjoys the little things." For a moment, Martha paused. These words, so ordinary on the surface, carried a weight she hadn't expected. They were honest, unhurried, and full of meaning. It struck her that Caleb's interest in her wasn't fleeting or shallow. He genuinely valued her company, her thoughts, and her presence. That realization was powerful, and it stirred something deep inside her, a mix of hope, courage, and longing. They spent the next hour tending the garden together. Caleb carefully dug small holes for new plants, while Martha guided him, laughing whenever he made a mistake or joked about his lack of gardening skills. It was natural and easy, like a rhythm they were creating together. For the first time in a long while, Martha felt completely at ease around someone, without pretense or worry. She could be herself, entirely and unapologetically. As they worked, Martha found herself opening up in ways she hadn't with anyone for years. She told him stories from her youth, memories of growing up on this land, and little moments of joy and sorrow that shaped who she was. Caleb listened intently, nodding, asking gentle questions, and never once interrupting or dismissing her words. His patience and genuine interest made her feel valued in a way that was entirely new to her. After the work was done, they sat together on a bench near the garden, watching the sun dip below the hills. There was a peaceful silence between them, broken only by the distant sound of cattle and the occasional chirp of birds settling in for the evening. Martha's heart pounded quietly in her chest as she considered the moment. "Caleb," she said finally, her voice soft, almost hesitant. "I've been thinking. I don't know if I'm ready to let myself feel this." She gestured vaguely, her hand sweeping toward him, toward the garden, toward the life that had begun to feel brighter. "It's been so long since I've felt hope or excitement or even a little happiness like this." Caleb turned to look at her, his expression serious yet tender. "Martha," he said, his voice calm and sure, "you don't have to be ready. You just have to be willing. I'm not here to rush you or change you. I'm here because I want to be with you, however that looks. No expectations, no apologies." Her eyes widened, and for the first time Martha felt the weight of doubt lifting. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever made her feel seen without judgment, without hesitation, without conditions. She realized that the fear she had carried for years, the fear of being too old, the fear of disappointing others, the fear of being hurt, was losing its power. She could allow herself to feel, to hope, to trust. They sat in silence for a while, letting the moment settle over them. Martha's mind wandered through memories of the past, the years she had spent protecting her heart, and the walls she had built around herself. And then she realized something extraordinary. Those walls were not permanent. She could take them down brick by brick and let someone in, not just anyone, but someone who truly respected her and cherished her. "Caleb," she whispered, a smile spreading slowly across her face. I think I want to try. I want to see where this goes, even if I'm afraid. I want to be with you." Caleb's smile was immediate and full of warmth. He reached over and took her hand gently, holding it as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "That's all I could ever want to hear," he said. "We'll take it one day at a time, together." The relief and joy Martha felt in that moment were profound. She realized that love, connection, and happiness were not bound by age or societal expectation. What mattered was the sincerity of the heart, the willingness to take a risk, and the courage to embrace life fully. She felt lighter, freer, and more alive than she had in decades. Over the next few weeks, their relationship deepened naturally. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations, only small moments that built trust and affection. They shared long walks through the fields, picnics in the shade of old trees, and quiet evenings talking by the fire. Caleb helped with chores around the house and garden, always with patience and respect, and Martha found herself laughing more than she had in years. Each day brought new discoveries about each other, about life, and about the possibilities that still awaited her. Of course, the whispers from the town continued. Some neighbors would glance curiously, some would murmur, and some would offer polite but wary congratulations. But Martha no longer felt constrained by their opinions. She had learned that the world's judgments were not as important as the truth she felt in her own heart. Caleb's unwavering respect and honesty had shown her that she deserved joy, companionship, and love, and no one else's approval could change that. One crisp morning, Caleb suggested they ride horses along the ridge near her house. Martha had not ridden in years, but she felt a surge of excitement at the idea. As they guided the horses through the open fields, the wind brushing against their faces, Martha laughed freely, feeling the exhilaration of movement, freedom, and shared adventure. She realized that life had more to offer than she had ever allowed herself to imagine, and that she could embrace these experiences fully, without fear. It was during moments like these that Martha truly understood the depth of her feelings for Caleb. She was not just enjoying his company. She was learning to trust again, to open her heart, and to accept that happiness could come unexpectedly, even later in life. And Caleb, with his quiet confidence, kindness, and patience, was teaching her that connection and love were not limited by age, circumstance, or expectation. One evening, as they watched the sunset together from the porch of her house, Caleb turned to Martha and said, "You know, I've never met anyone like you. You've lived a full life, faced challenges, and yet you still have this light inside you. I don't care what anyone else thinks. I just want to be with you." Martha felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. For so long she had doubted herself, doubted the possibility of love, and doubted her own worth. But here was a man who saw her fully, who valued her experience, and who wanted to share life with her. She reached for his hand, feeling the warmth and strength in his touch, and realized that the decision was no longer about fear or doubt. It was about choosing to embrace joy and connection wholeheartedly. "Yes," she said softly, her voice steady and full of certainty. "I want that too. I want us, Caleb." He smiled, a quiet, happy smile, and they sat together hand in hand, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. In that moment, Martha felt a profound sense of peace and exhilaration. She had taken a risk, allowed herself to be vulnerable, and opened her heart to the possibility of happiness, and it had been worth every ounce of fear she had felt. For Martha Reynolds, life had begun a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, joy, and the kind of connection she had once thought impossible. And as she sat there, holding Caleb's hand, she realized that sometimes the greatest rewards come when we allow ourselves to take chances, to trust, and to love without apology. After months of quiet companionship, laughter, and shared moments, Martha Reynolds felt a change in herself she had never thought possible. Life, which had once been predictable and safe, was now full of energy, color, and joy. The days that had once passed in quiet routine now held anticipation, small adventures, and a warmth she had long believed was behind her. With Caleb by her side, she discovered that age, expectation, and judgment had no power over her happiness. Their mornings began slowly, with Martha preparing breakfast while Caleb tended to Daisy or organized chores outside. The smell of fresh coffee and warm toast would fill the house, mingling with the scent of the garden that Martha nurtured so carefully. There was a rhythm to these mornings that brought comfort, yet at the same time, a sense of excitement lingered, the knowledge that each day could hold surprises. Sometimes Caleb would walk into the kitchen carrying freshly picked vegetables from the ranch, and they would laugh together over small kitchen mishaps, teasing each other gently as they prepared meals. These small moments, ordinary to an outsider, were extraordinary to Martha. As the weeks turned into months, Martha and Caleb found themselves deeply involved in each other's worlds. Martha had grown accustomed to the rhythm of ranch life, learning about feeding the animals, repairing fences, and checking on the cattle. Caleb, in turn, showed a quiet patience that Martha admired, never rushing her, always teaching with encouragement, and allowing her to grow confident in tasks she had never imagined herself performing. The work was satisfying, yes, but it was also symbolic, a shared investment in life, in trust, and in a future neither of them could yet fully see. One crisp autumn morning, Caleb suggested they take a walk along the hills near her house. The wind carried the scent of fallen leaves, and the trees blazed with fiery reds, golds, and oranges. Martha felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years as she followed him up the trail, Daisy trotting happily ahead. As they reached a high point overlooking the valley, Caleb stopped, looking out at the view with a thoughtful expression. "Martha," he said softly, "I want you to know something. Being with you, it's changed how I see life. You've taught me patience, perspective, and the value of really noticing someone. I don't care what anyone thinks about us. I care about you. And I want us to continue building this together." Martha turned to look at him, her heart swelling. There was no hesitation in his words, no uncertainty, only honesty. "Caleb," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I feel the same way. You've brought life back into my days, into my heart. I've been afraid, yes, but being with you makes me braver, happier, alive." They stood together for a moment, holding hands, letting the wind brush past them and the sunlight warm their faces. Martha realized that this was more than a friendship or a passing infatuation. It was a partnership built on trust, respect, and shared joy. They were learning how to be with each other fully, without apology or fear, and the freedom of it exhilarated her. Life at home continued with a new rhythm. Evenings were spent together by the fireplace, sharing stories of their day, reading aloud from favorite books, or planning small trips to nearby towns. Sometimes they would take Daisy on long walks along the river, laughing as she splashed through the water. And sometimes they would simply sit quietly on the porch, watching the sky change color as the sun set behind the hills. Every moment, large or small, carried meaning. Martha had learned to treasure these experiences, to see joy not only in grand gestures, but in the ordinary, the shared, the simple. The town had noticed the changes in Martha as well. People who had once whispered or raised eyebrows now observed with curiosity and sometimes admiration. Some neighbors stopped to chat more warmly, perhaps inspired by the genuine happiness they saw reflected in her smile. Martha didn't concern herself with judgment anymore. She had learned that happiness was not something to be measured by the opinions of others. It was something to be experienced fully, savored without hesitation. Caleb's unwavering support had shown her that authenticity mattered far more than perception. One Saturday afternoon, Martha invited Caleb over to help prepare her garden for winter. The task was simple but meaningful: trimming plants, clearing debris, and planting bulbs that would bloom in the spring. As they worked together, Martha realized that their relationship had become seamless, a partnership that flowed naturally. Caleb guided her gently, she assisted willingly, and they laughed together when Daisy interrupted by chasing a stray leaf or nudging their tools. Martha felt a deep sense of gratitude for the life she had, for the love she had found, and for the courage she had discovered within herself. The most profound moment came one evening as they shared a quiet meal. The sky outside was painted in muted shades of pink and lavender, and the house was filled with the scent of roasted vegetables. Caleb reached across the table, taking Martha's hand in his. "You know," he said, his voice low and serious, "I don't ever want you to feel like you have to apologize for who you are, for what you've lived through, or for the life you've led. I admire you, respect you, and care for you exactly as you are. No changes needed, no judgments, just us." Martha felt tears prick at her eyes. She had spent decades believing that her best years were behind her, that love and excitement were for younger people, that she had missed her chance. Yet here was Caleb, showing her that the heart has no age limit, that joy is not reserved for youth, and that connection can happen unexpectedly, even later in life. She squeezed his hand gently, smiling through the emotion. "Thank you, Caleb, for seeing me, for choosing me, without apology. That's all I could ever want." In the weeks that followed, their bond continued to deepen. They worked on small projects together around the house, planted more flowers in the garden, and explored nearby trails. Martha felt lighter, more present, and fully engaged in life. She laughed freely, spoke openly, and allowed herself to dream again. Caleb encouraged her to pursue her passions, her love of gardening, her work at the library, even small ambitions she had tucked away for years. He never imposed, never pressured, simply supported and celebrated her in every small way. One afternoon, as winter approached and frost began to settle on the hills, Martha and Caleb took a long walk through the snow-dusted fields. They spoke quietly, laughing over shared memories from childhood, life lessons they had learned, and hopes for the future. Martha realized that she had learned something essential. Happiness is a choice. It is not something handed to us, nor something we must wait for indefinitely. It is something we must allow ourselves to embrace fully, with courage and without apology. By the time the first snow fully covered the hills and trees, Martha had transformed in ways she had never expected. She was no longer the cautious, reserved woman who had once lived solely in routine. She was vibrant, hopeful, and fully alive. The love she shared with Caleb had become a central part of her existence. But more importantly, it had taught her to trust herself, to embrace life, and to allow joy to fill her days. They celebrated the first snowfall with a quiet evening by the fireplace, sipping hot cocoa and watching Daisy chase flakes outside the window. Caleb looked at Martha with that same quiet intensity he always carried and said, "I'm glad we found each other, Martha. You've made my life better, brighter, and more meaningful. I hope I've done the same for you." Martha smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. "You have, Caleb, more than you know. I feel alive again. I feel like life has given me a second chance, and I'm grateful every single day." That moment forward, Martha and Caleb continued to live without apology, without concern for age, for judgment, or for expectation. Their life together was simple yet full, ordinary yet extraordinary. They found joy in the smallest moments, adventure in the routine, and love in the honesty and respect they shared. They supported each other through challenges, celebrated each other's triumphs, and built a partnership that was strong, tender, and enduring. Martha often reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She thought about the years she had spent doubting herself, fearing disappointment, and holding back from life. She realized that those years had taught her valuable lessons, but they had not defined her. The heart has the capacity to grow, to love, and to find joy at any stage of life. With Caleb, she had discovered that truth in the most beautiful way. And so, in the quiet of their Montana home, surrounded by rolling hills, the smell of fresh earth, and the warmth of a love that had been chosen without apology, Martha Reynolds found a peace and happiness she had never thought possible. Life had surprised her, challenged her, and ultimately gifted her with a love that was honest, sincere, and transformative. And in the embrace of that love, she understood fully that it was never too late to begin again, to take chances, and to live joyfully, without fear and without apology.